You have 48 hours, Grimwald. Pay up, or we collect in other ways. Serafina Blackwood pressed her ear against the mahogany door of her stepfather's study, her heart hammering as the gravelly voice continued. She recognized that tone, the kind that promised violence without hesitation. Please, just give me more time. The investments will pay off, I swear. Time's up. $3 million doesn't just disappear, and neither does the interest. The stranger's footsteps echoed across the hardwood. Mr. Ravencrest has been more than patient. Mordecai Grimwald's voice cracked. I'll get the money. You need to face reality. You've got nothing left to sell except that pretty stepdaughter of yours. Serafina's blood turned to ice. You can't be serious, Mordecai whispered. Dead serious. She's 22, educated, untouched. Worth more than your pathetic excuses. The man's laugh made her skin crawl. Ravencrest's been looking for a wife. Convenient, wouldn't you say? She's not property. Everything's property when you owe Thaddeus Ravencrest $3 million. Sign the contract, or we take your kneecaps instead. Your choice. Serafina stumbled backward, her world tilting. She'd known Mordecai had gambling problems, but this? Her own stepfather, discussing her like livestock to pay his debts? The study door swung open. A mountain of a man in an expensive suit filled the doorway, his cold eyes finding her immediately. Behind him, Mordecai sat slumped in his leather chair, looking 20 years older than his 55. Listening at doors, princess? The enforcer smiled without warmth. Perfect timing. You'll want to hear this. Serafina lifted her chin, refusing to cower. I heard enough. Then you know you're getting married. He tossed a manila envelope onto the coffee table. Contracts already drawn up. Ceremonies this Saturday. I won't do it. Mordecai finally looked up, his face ashen. Sarah, honey, you don't understand. These people. I understand perfectly. She turned to the enforcer. What happens if I refuse? His grin widened. Well, we could start with your stepfather's fingers. Work our way up to more vital parts. Then maybe visit that little elementary school where you volunteer. Kids are so fragile, aren't they? The threat hit her like a physical blow. Those children trusted her, loved her. She couldn't let them suffer for Mordecai's mistakes. You're monsters. We're businessmen. Big difference. He checked his watch. Ravencrest expects to meet his bride-to-be tomorrow at 2. His estate in the Hamptons. Don't be late. After he left, silence stretched between Serafina and Mordecai like a chasm. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to run. Instead, she asked the only question that mattered. How long have you known? Known what? That you'd sell me to pay your debts. Mordecai's shoulders sagged. I never wanted this. I thought I could win it back. The casino said I was due for a big hit. Stop. She held up a hand. Just stop. That night, Serafina stared at her reflection in her bedroom mirror. Tomorrow she'd meet the man who'd bought her like a prized mare. Thaddeus Ravencrest. She'd Googled him after the enforcer left. 35 years old, worth billions, and rumored to be ruthless in business and personal matters alike. The tabloids called him the Ice King of Wall Street. She touched her lips, wondering if she'd ever kiss someone who actually chose her. The next afternoon, a black limousine arrived precisely at 1:30. Serafina had dressed carefully in a simple navy dress, conservative enough to avoid seeming eager, elegant enough to avoid insult. The driver said nothing during the hour-long ride to the Hamptons. Ravencrest's estate sprawled across what looked like half of Long Island. The main house rose like a fortress of glass and steel, all sharp angles and intimidating height. Serafina's grandmother's cottage could fit in the entryway. A silver-haired man in a perfectly pressed suit greeted her at the massive front door. Miss Blackwood, I presume. I'm Ezekiel Morrison, Mr. Ravencrest's house manager. He's waiting in his office. The office occupied an entire corner of the second floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of manicured gardens and the Atlantic Ocean beyond. Behind an imposing desk sat the man himself. Thaddeus Ravencrest looked exactly like his photos, yet somehow more imposing in person. Dark hair, sharp cheekbones, and gray eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her appearance. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. Sit, he said without preamble. Serafina remained standing. I prefer to stand. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe even approval. Suit yourself. I assume you understand why you're here. Because my stepfather's an idiot and you're buying a wife. Buying implies ownership. I prefer to think of this as a mutually beneficial arrangement. Beneficial for whom exactly? Your stepfather keeps his limbs. You get financial security for life. I get a wife who won't bore me to death at social functions. He leaned back in his chair. Seems fair. And if I say no, then your stepfather suffers the consequences of his choices. But you won't say no. How can you be so sure? For the first time, his expression softened slightly. Because you spent 3 years volunteering at Willowbrook Elementary. Because you used your college fund to pay for your neighbor's cancer treatments. Because you're the kind of person who puts others before herself, even when those others don't deserve it. The accuracy of his knowledge unsettled her. You had me investigated. Thoroughly. I don't make investments without proper research. Is that what I am? An investment? You're my future wife. The ceremony is Saturday at 4. Ezekiel will handle the details. Serafina finally sat down, not from compliance, but because her legs felt unsteady. What exactly do you expect from this marriage? Discretion, loyalty, an heir, eventually. His tone remained businesslike. In return, you'll want for nothing. Credit cards, clothes, cars, whatever you desire. Except freedom. Freedom's overrated. Security lasts longer. She studied his face, searching for some crack in that perfect control. What made you so cold? The question hung between them like a challenge. For a moment, she thought he might actually answer. Instead, he stood and moved to the windows. Ezekiel will show you to your room. You'll stay here until the wedding. Easier to handle the arrangements that way. I'm a prisoner then. You're a guest. The distinction matters to me, even if it doesn't to you. As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. Miss Blackwood. Yes. Don't run. I'd find you, and I'd be significantly less accommodating the second time around. The threat was delivered in the same calm tone he'd used to discuss wedding arrangements, which somehow made it infinitely more chilling. Walking down the endless hallway toward whatever room would serve as her gilded cage, Serafina realized her old life had officially ended. In 3 days, she'd become Mrs. Thaddeus Ravencrest, wife to a man who saw her as nothing more than a solution to a problem. She just had to figure out how to survive it. The guest room Ezekiel led her to could have housed a small family. A king-sized bed dominated the space, flanked by tall windows that offered stunning views of the estate's grounds. Despite the luxury, Serafina felt like she was standing in a beautifully decorated prison cell. The wedding dress will arrive tomorrow morning for final fittings, Ezekiel said, his tone professionally neutral. Dinner is served at 7. Mr. Ravencrest expects you to join him. After he left, Serafina tested the door handle. Unlocked, but she had no doubt security cameras tracked her every movement. She walked to the windows and pressed her palms against the cool glass. The gardens stretched endlessly, manicured to perfection. Even nature seemed controlled in Thaddeus Ravencrest's world. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. A young woman entered, carrying an armload of garment bags. She had warm brown eyes and a genuine smile that seemed out of place in this cold mansion. I'm Vivian Clearwater, Mr. Ravencrest's stylist. I brought some options for tomorrow's dinner and the rehearsal. She hung the bags in the enormous closet. Though honestly, you could wear a potato sack and still outshine everyone. Thank you, Serafina said, surprised by the kindness. How long have you worked for him? 3 years. He's not as terrible as people think. Vivian's voice dropped to a whisper. Distant, yes. Cold, absolutely. But he's never been cruel to his staff. Small comfort when you're being sold like cattle. Vivian's expression grew serious. I heard about the arrangement. I'm sorry, but maybe it won't be as bad as you think. He bought me to pay off a debt. How could it not be horrible? Because I've seen him watch you. Serafina frowned. What do you mean? The security footage from your first meeting. I was helping Ezekiel with some administrative tasks when Mr. Ravencrest reviewed it. He watched that conversation 3 times, and each time, his expression changed when you asked what made him so cold. Before Serafina could respond, Vivian glanced at her watch. I should go? Try the Navy Valentino for dinner tonight. It brings out your eyes. Alone again, Serafina found herself thinking about Vivian's words. She'd seen something in Thaddeus's face during that moment too. A flicker of vulnerability he'd quickly suppressed. But it didn't change the fundamental reality of her situation. At 7 sharp, she made her way to the dining room, wearing the navy dress Vivian had suggested. The room could have accommodated 50 people, but only 2 places were set at one end of the massive mahogany table. Thaddeus stood when she entered, a gesture that surprised her. He'd changed from his business suit into dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, the top button undone. The casual look made him seem almost human. "You look lovely," he said, pulling out her chair. "Thank you." She settled into the seat, hyper-aware of his proximity as he pushed the chair forward. The meal proceeded in relative silence, broken only by the soft clink of silverware and the distant sound of waves against the shore. The food was exquisite, some kind of fish she couldn't identify, paired with vegetables that tasted like they'd been harvested that morning. "Tell me about your mother," Thaddeus said suddenly. The request caught her off guard. "Why? We're going to be married. I should know something about your family." "My real family, or the man who sold me?" His jaw tightened slightly. "Your real family." Serafina set down her fork. "My mother died when I was 8. Cancer. She was an artist, painted landscapes that made you feel like you could step right into them. My father died 2 years later in a car accident. That's when Mordecai came into the picture." "How did they meet?" "He was my father's business partner. Swooped in to take care of us after the funeral." Her voice turned bitter. "Took care of himself to my father's assets, more like." "And your education?" "Full scholarship to Columbia. Art history major, museum studies minor. I wanted to work in a gallery, maybe curate exhibitions someday." She met his eyes. "That dream's dead now, I suppose." Something shifted in his expression. "Why would it be dead?" "Because I'll be too busy playing the perfect billionaire's wife." "I never said you couldn't work. Didn't you? When you listed your expectations, discretion, loyalty, and heir, you failed to mention career aspirations." He was quiet for a long moment, swirling wine in his glass. "My previous arrangement didn't work out because the woman involved had no interests beyond spending my money. I found it tedious." "Previous arrangement?" "I was engaged before. 2 years ago." His tone grew clipped. "She turned out to be more interested in my bank account than my company." "What happened?" "I discovered she was passing information about my business deals to competitors. Pillow talk, she called it." The words carried a coldness that made Serafina shiver. "She cost me $50 million before I uncovered her betrayal." The vulnerability Vivian had mentioned flickered across his features before disappearing behind his usual mask. Serafina found herself leaning forward despite herself. "Is that why you wanted someone who had no choice? Someone who couldn't betray you because they'd be trapped?" "Partially." He met her gaze directly. "But also because arranged marriages have better success rates than love matches. No unrealistic expectations, no romantic delusions to shatter." How clinical, how practical. They finished the meal in silence, but the tension between them had shifted. It was still there, but now it carried an undercurrent of something else, curiosity, maybe even understanding. As they rose from the table, Thaddeus surprised her again. "Would you like to see the library? Ezekiel mentioned you were a reader." The library took up the entire east wing of the house. Floor-to-ceiling shelves stretched as far as she could see, filled with thousands of volumes. Rolling ladders provided access to the upper levels, and comfortable reading nooks were scattered throughout. "My God," Serafina breathed. "It's like a cathedral for books. My grandfather started the collection. I've added to it over the years." He pulled a slim volume from a nearby shelf. First edition Dickinson, my mother's favorite poet. She took the book carefully, noting how reverently he'd handled it. "She had good taste. She died when I was 12. Car accident, like your father." The admission hung between them, an unexpected moment of shared pain. Serafina found herself studying his profile as he gazed up at the towering shelves. "Is this why you're so controlled? Because you lost her young?" Loss teaches you that nothing is permanent. Control is the only constant you can rely on. But control is an illusion. Life happens whether you plan for it or not. He turned to face her fully. Spoken like someone who's never had real power. Or spoken like someone who's learned that the things that matter most can't be controlled. Love, loss, the moments that actually define us, they all happen without our permission. For a heartbeat, something raw and unguarded crossed his features. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. "Excuse me," he said, stepping away to take the call. Serafina wandered deeper into the library, trailing her fingers along the spines of countless books. In a secluded alcove, she discovered something unexpected, a section devoted entirely to art books. Museum catalogs, artist biographies, exhibition histories from galleries around the world. She pulled out a volume on Georgia O'Keeffe and found handwritten notes in the margins. The handwriting was masculine, precise, definitely Thaddeus's. But the observations were sensitive, thoughtful, showing a deep appreciation for artistic technique and emotional expression. Finding anything interesting? She turned, still holding the book. You annotated this. Old habit from college. I studied art history before switching to business. You switched. My father convinced me that art was an impractical pursuit for someone inheriting a fortune. He wasn't wrong. But there was regret in his voice. Though I still support several galleries and museums. Anonymous donations, mostly. Another layer peeled away from the carefully constructed image he presented to the world. The Ice King of Wall Street had abandoned his artistic passions for family duty, just as she was abandoning her dreams for family survival. Maybe we're not so different after all, she said softly. Don't romanticize this, Serafina. We're both making practical choices. But the way he said her name, carefully, almost tenderly, suggested otherwise. As they walked back through the house, Serafina found herself stealing glances at him. The man who'd seemed like a cold stranger yesterday was revealing unexpected depths. It didn't change their circumstances, but it made them more complicated. At her bedroom door, he paused. The rehearsal dinner is tomorrow night. Small gathering, just immediate family and the officiant. What family? I thought this was purely business. My younger sister flies in from California, and despite everything, your stepfather will be there. The reminder of Mordecai sent a chill through her. I don't want to see him. Unfortunately, his presence is required for legal purposes. But after Saturday, you'll never have to see him again if you choose. There was something almost protective in his tone, which surprised her more than anything else that had happened that day. Thaddeus, she said as he turned to leave. Yes. Thank you. For the library, I mean. And for sharing things about yourself. He nodded once, a gesture that somehow felt more intimate than words. After he disappeared down the hallway, Serafina leaned against her closed door. In 24 hours, she'd be married to a man she was only beginning to understand. The thought terrified and intrigued her in equal measure. 2 weeks into marriage, Serafina discovered that being Mrs. Thaddeus Ravencrest was nothing like she'd expected. Her days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Mornings in the library, afternoons exploring the grounds or swimming in the infinity pool, evenings sharing surprisingly comfortable dinners with her husband. Thaddeus left for his Manhattan office each morning at 7 sharp, returning around 8 in the evening. Their conversations remained surface level but civil, like polite strangers sharing the same elegant space. He never pushed for physical intimacy beyond what was necessary for public appearances, and he never mentioned the air he'd originally demanded. The most unsettling part wasn't his coldness. It was the moments when that mask slipped. Mrs. Ravencrest? Ezekiel appeared in the library doorway, interrupting her reading. You have a visitor. Miss Clearwater is here. Vivian breezed in carrying coffee and what looked like a small mountain of shopping bags. Rescue mission, she announced cheerfully. I brought caffeine and gossip. Which do you want first? Gossip, Serafina said without hesitation. Your husband's been asking questions about you. Serafina set down her book. What kind of questions? The kind a man asks when he's interested in more than a business arrangement. Yesterday, he wanted to know your favorite flowers. Tuesday, it was your preferred coffee. Last week, he spent an hour grilling me about your college thesis. He's probably just trying to maintain the illusion of a real marriage. Or, Vivian said, settling into the chair across from her, he's actually curious about the woman he married. Before Serafina could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Having lunch at the Met today? Thought you might enjoy the new Monet exhibition. Car will pick you up at noon if interested. T. She stared at the message, heart skipping unexpectedly. Good news. Vivian asked, reading her expression. I think my husband just asked me on a date. The drive into Manhattan gave Serafina time to overthink everything. Why was Thaddeus inviting her to an art exhibition? Was this part of some larger strategy, or had he simply remembered her love of art? She found him waiting by the museum's entrance, looking devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit. When he spotted her, something shifted in his expression, appreciation, maybe even genuine pleasure. You came, he said, offering his arm. You mentioned Monet. I'm not strong enough to resist Impressionism. They moved through the exhibition slowly, Serafina losing herself in the familiar joy of studying brushwork and color theory. She didn't realize she was unconsciously narrating her observations until she noticed Thaddeus watching her instead of the paintings. Sorry, she said, flushing. I get carried away. Don't apologize. It's refreshing to hear someone discuss art with actual knowledge instead of pretentious speculation. They paused in front of Water Lilies, and Serafina found herself studying his profile as he examined the painting. What do you see? She asked. Light, he said immediately. The way he captured how light changes everything it touches. Same pond, same lilies, but completely transformed depending on the time of day, the season, his emotional state when he painted it. The insight surprised her with its depth. You really did study art. Before my father reminded me that Ravencrest men build empires, not dream about them. What if you could do both? He turned to face her fully. Meaning? Nothing. She looked back at the painting, suddenly self-conscious. Just thinking out loud. They had lunch at a small cafe near the museum, the conversation flowing more naturally than it ever had at home. Thaddeus asked about her thesis on museum curation, and she found herself describing her vision for exhibitions that made art accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy elite. You light up when you talk about it, he observed. It was my dream job. Past tense. Why past tense? Because dreams are luxuries I can't afford anymore. He was quiet for a long moment, absently turning his wedding ring, a simple platinum band that matched her own. What if I told you the Whitney is looking for a new assistant curator? Contemporary American Art Division. Serafina's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. How would you know that? I sit on several museum boards. The position hasn't been posted yet, but applications are being quietly accepted. Thaddeus, I can't. Why not? Because it would look like nepotism. Like I only got the job because of who I married. So prove them wrong. Apply under your maiden name. Submit your portfolio anonymously. If you're as good as I suspect you are, the work will speak for itself. The offer hung between them, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. It was the first glimpse of a future that might include more than just playing house in his Hamptons mansion. Why would you do this for me? His gray eyes met hers steadily. Because intelligent women shouldn't waste their talents on charity galas and shopping expeditions. The drive home was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. As they pulled into the circular driveway, Serafina noticed an unfamiliar car parked near the main entrance. Expecting someone? She asked. Thaddeus's expression darkened. Unfortunately, the woman waiting in the foyer was stunning in the way that required serious money and excellent genetics. Platinum blonde hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders, and her designer dress probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. But it was her eyes that caught Serafina's attention, cold blue and calculating. Cordelia, Thaddeus said, his voice carefully neutral. This is unexpected. Is it? The woman's smile was sharp as a blade. I heard congratulations are in order. Her gaze swept over Serafina dismissively. So this is the little bride who captured the Ice King's heart. Serafina, meet Cordelia Ashworth. Cordelia, my wife. The way he said, my wife, carried a subtle possessiveness that sent an unexpected thrill through Serafina. Charming, Cordelia purred. Though I have to say, darling, you do have a type. Young, naive, easily manipulated. Cordelia. Thaddeus's voice carried a warning. What? I'm simply observing that your taste in women has remained remarkably consistent. She turned back to Serafina with false sweetness. Has he told you about our engagement yet, dear? How passionate we were. How he used to whisper the most delicious things in my ear. Serafina felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. He mentioned you were business associates who parted ways. I assumed that was a polite way of saying you bored him. Cordelia's perfect smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. I came to discuss the Meridian project, she said to Thaddeus. Daddy's lawyers think there might be some irregularities in the contracts you drew up. Then Daddy's lawyers should call my lawyers. This isn't a social visit, Cordelia. Of course it is. I wanted to meet the woman who managed to get a ring on your finger after you swore you'd never marry. Her laugh was like broken glass. Tell me, darling, what's your secret? Because 2 years ago, this man told me marriage was for fools and romantics. Serafina glanced at Thaddeus, whose face had gone completely blank. Whatever game Cordelia was playing, she was winning. Maybe he just needed to find the right person, Serafina said quietly. The right person? Cordelia's eyebrows rose. Or the most convenient one. I heard about your stepfather's gambling debts. Such a romantic beginning to a marriage, don't you think? The barb hit its mark, and Serafina felt her composure crack. But before she could respond, Thaddeus stepped forward. That's enough. Is it? Cordelia moved closer to him, close enough that her perfume filled the air between them. Because I remember a time when you couldn't keep your hands off me. When you said I was the only woman who understood you. Things change, do they? Or are you just playing a longer game? She glanced meaningfully at Serafina. After all, marriages of convenience can be so easily dissolved. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Serafina felt something cold settle in her stomach. I think you should leave, Thaddeus said. I think I should stay for dinner. Like old times. Cordelia's smile was predatory. Unless your little wife objects. All eyes turned to Serafina. She could feel the weight of the moment, the sense that whatever she said next would set something in motion that couldn't be taken back. Of course not, she heard herself say. Any friend of my husband's is welcome. Cordelia's smile widened. How gracious. This should be fun. As Ezekiel led Cordelia to a guest room to freshen up before dinner, Thaddeus caught Serafina's arm gently. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Running away would have given her exactly what she wanted. Cordelia doesn't play fair. Neither do I, when someone threatens what's mine. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and they both froze. What was hers? When had she started thinking of this arrangement as something worth protecting? Serafina, I should change for dinner, she said quickly, fleeing toward the stairs before he could finish whatever he'd been about to say. But as she climbed to her room, one thought echoed in her mind. Somewhere between the library conversations and museum visits, between his careful kindness and unexpected vulnerability, she'd stopped thinking of Thaddeus Ravencrest as her captor. The problem was, she wasn't sure what she thought of him as instead. Dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare, with Cordelia wielding charm and memory like weapons. Remember that weekend in Napa, Thaddeus? She said, cutting into her filet mignon with surgical precision. The little vineyard where we stayed? You said it was the most peaceful you'd ever felt. Thaddeus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That was a long time ago. Not so long. What was it you said? That you could see yourself growing old there, making wine, forgetting all about the corporate world? She laughed, a sound like champagne bubbles bursting. Of course, that was before you discovered I'd been sharing your business secrets. Such a shame how trust can shatter so completely, isn't it? Serafina watched the exchange with growing unease. Every seemingly innocent comment was calculated to remind Thaddeus of their shared past, to make her feel like an intruder in her own marriage. The salmon is excellent, Serafina said, attempting to redirect the conversation. Oh yes, Thaddeus always did have exquisite taste. In food, in wine, in women. Cordelia's smile was razor-sharp. Though I must say, your wedding was surprisingly small. Almost rushed. Tell me, dear, was there a particular reason for the haste? We preferred intimacy to spectacle, Serafina replied evenly. How romantic. Though I would have thought a man of Thaddeus's stature would want a more significant celebration. When we were engaged, we planned the most elaborate affair. The guest list alone was over 300 people. Plans change, Thaddeus said quietly. Indeed they do. Cordelia leaned forward conspiratorially. But some things never change. Like the way you tap your fingers when you're frustrated, or how you always order the same wine when you're uncomfortable. Some habits run too deep to break. As if summoned by her words, Thaddeus's fingers began their subtle percussion against the stem of his wine glass. Serafina noticed, and from Cordelia's satisfied expression, so had she. Tell me about your family, Serafina, Cordelia continued. I heard your stepfather had some unfortunate financial difficulties. How devastating that must have been, watching him lose everything. The words hit like a slap. My family's circumstances are private. Of course they are. Though in my experience, financial desperation can lead people to make interesting choices. Her eyes glittered with malice. Choices they might not make under different circumstances. Cordelia, Thaddeus's voice carried a warning that made even Serafina's spine stiffen. What? I'm simply making conversation with your lovely wife. After all, we're all friends here, aren't we? The dessert course arrived, some elaborate chocolate creation that looked like edible architecture. Serafina had lost her appetite, but she forced herself to take small bites while Cordelia continued her campaign of subtle cruelty. "I hope you don't mind me staying for a few days," Cordelia said as they finished. "Daddy's business with Thaddeus is rather complex, and I do so hate hotels. They're so impersonal." Of course, Serafina managed, though every instinct screamed against it. "Wonderful. Perhaps tomorrow you could show me around the grounds? I'd love to see what changes you've made." Though knowing Thaddeus, he probably hasn't let you change much. He's rather set in his ways about his personal spaces. After dinner, Thaddeus excused himself to take a business call, leaving Serafina alone with her unwanted house guest. They moved to the living room, where Cordelia made herself comfortable on the sofa like she owned the place. "He's different with you," Cordelia observed, studying her manicured nails. "What do you mean?" "Careful, controlled. With me, he was passionate, sometimes reckless. We used to fight like cats and dogs, then make up so intensely the staff would blush." She glanced up with mock sympathy. "But I suppose that's not the kind of marriage you have, is it?" Serafina felt heat rise in her cheeks. "My marriage is perfectly satisfactory." Satisfactory. What a tragic word for a relationship. Cordelia stood and walked to the mantelpiece, where wedding photos displayed a carefully curated version of their ceremony. "You know, in this picture, you look like you're attending a funeral rather than your own wedding." "I was nervous." "Were you? Or were you simply playing your part in a business transaction?" Cordelia picked up one of the frames, studying it closely. "Don't misunderstand me, dear. I'm not judging. We all do what we must to survive. But don't delude yourself into thinking this is anything more than what it is." "And what is it exactly?" "A mutually beneficial arrangement. He gets a respectable wife who won't embarrass him at social functions. You get security and freedom from your stepfather's debts. It's quite practical, really." The words stung because they echoed Serafina's own fears. "You seem very invested in the details of my marriage." "Only because I care about Thaddeus. We may not be together anymore, but I hate to see him settle for less than he deserves." "Less than he deserves." Cordelia set down the photo and turned to face her fully. "A woman who chose him freely. A woman who loves him for who he is, not what he can provide. A woman who wasn't purchased to solve a problem." Each word was a precision strike, and Serafina felt them land with devastating accuracy. Because wasn't that exactly what she was? A solution bought and paid for? "I should check on some things for tomorrow," Serafina said, desperate to escape the conversation. "Of course. Don't let me keep you." Cordelia's smile was victorious. "Sweet dreams, dear." Serafina fled to her bedroom, her heart pounding. She found Thaddeus in his adjoining study, still on his phone call. Through the connecting door, she could see him pacing behind his desk, his free hand running through his hair in frustration. "I don't care what Ashworth thinks he can prove," he was saying. "The contracts were legally binding, and if he wants to challenge them, he can see me in court." He hung up and noticed her standing there. "Sorry, business crisis that couldn't wait." "Is everything all right?" "Nothing I can't handle." But the tension in his shoulders suggested otherwise. "How was your evening with Cordelia?" "Educational." Something in her tone made him look up sharply. "What did she say?" "Just friendly conversation between new acquaintances." She couldn't bring herself to repeat Cordelia's pointed observations about their marriage. "Serafina, Cordelia has a talent for twisting conversations to serve her purposes. Whatever she said we were both getting what we needed from this arrangement. That it was practical." Thaddeus was quiet for a long moment. "And you disagreed?" She faltered, unsure how to voice the growing confusion in her heart. "I don't know anymore." He stood and moved toward her, stopping just close enough that she could smell his cologne. "What don't you know?" "What this is. What we are." She met his eyes, searching for something she couldn't name. "In the beginning, it was simple. A transaction. But now you take me to art exhibitions and offer to help with my career. You share your thoughts about paintings and tell me about your mother. You look at me sometimes like..." She shook her head. "I'm probably imagining things." "Like what?" "Like you might actually care about me. Not as an asset or a convenience, but as a person." Thaddeus reached up and touched her cheek, his thumb tracing along her jawline. "You're not imagining things." The admission hung between them, charged with possibility and danger. Serafina felt her heart racing as he stepped closer. "Thaddeus, I know this wasn't what either of us planned," he said quietly. "But somewhere between watching you light up in that library and listening to you talk about art today, I started wanting things I had no right to want." "What kind of things?" Instead of answering, he leaned down and kissed her. Not the polite, perfunctory kisses they'd shared for public appearances, but something real and desperate and complicated. Serafina felt herself melting into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as weeks of carefully maintained distance collapsed in an instant. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "That kind of thing," he said roughly. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps in the hallway made them spring apart. Cordelia appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Sorry to interrupt. I was just looking for some reading material. Jet lag, you know." Her gaze flicked between them, taking in their flushed faces and disheveled appearance. "Don't mind me." She disappeared as quickly as she'd arrived, but the damage was done. The spell was broken, reality rushing back in a cold wave. "She planned that," Serafina said. "Probably. Why? What does she want?" Thaddeus's expression had shuddered again, the vulnerable man who'd kissed her moments before replaced by the controlled businessman. "Power. Revenge. With Cordelia, it's hard to tell the difference." "And us? What does this mean for us?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But whatever happens, don't let her get in your head. Cordelia thrives on creating doubt and insecurity." Too late, Serafina thought. The seeds had already been planted, and that kiss, as earth-shattering as it had been, might have been exactly what Cordelia needed to begin her real game. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Serafina couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The careful balance they'd achieved was crumbling, and she wasn't sure if what emerged from the wreckage would be something beautiful or something that would destroy them both. Serafina woke to the sound of raised voices drifting up from the terrace below. Through her bedroom window, she could see Thaddeus and Cordelia in what appeared to be a heated discussion. Even from this distance, the tension between them was palpable. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, but by the time she reached the terrace, only Cordelia remained, looking perfectly composed despite whatever argument had just concluded. "Good morning, dear," Cordelia said brightly. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Thaddeus had to rush off to the city. Some emergency with the Ashworth contracts. The satisfaction in her voice made Serafina's stomach turn. "What kind of emergency?" "Oh, the tedious kind involving lawyers and threats of litigation. Daddy can be so dramatic when he doesn't get his way." She sipped her coffee delicately. "But don't worry. I'm sure your husband can handle it. He's very good at handling things." After Cordelia disappeared to make phone calls, Serafina found herself alone with her thoughts and a growing sense of unease. The kiss last night had changed everything and nothing. Thaddeus was gone before she could process what it meant, leaving her to navigate Cordelia's presence alone. She decided to lose herself in the library, but as she searched for a book on contemporary art theory, her fingers brushed against something unexpected. Hidden behind a row of art history volumes was a slim folder marked with her name. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were documents she'd never seen before, official papers bearing legal seals and signatures. Her birth certificate, but not the one she'd always known. This one listed different parents entirely: Helena Nightingale and Marcus Blackwood, not Mordecai Grimwald. The folder contained more devastating revelations. Adoption papers showing that Marcus Blackwood, the man she believed was her biological father, had actually adopted her as an infant. Financial records indicating that the Nightingale family had established a trust fund worth millions in her name, to be released on her 25th birthday. In a letter, written in elegant handwriting, dated just before her 8th birthday. "My dearest Serafina," it began. "If you are reading this, then the truth I tried so hard to protect you from has finally surfaced. Your mother, Helena Nightingale, was my dear friend, and when she died giving birth to you, I promised to keep you safe from those who would use your inheritance against you. The Nightingales and Ravencrest families have been enemies for generations, a feud born of business rivalry and personal betrayal. I fear that knowledge of your true parentage would make you a target, so Marcus and I decided to hide your identity until you were old enough to protect yourself. I pray you will forgive us for the deception, and that when the time comes, you will use your inheritance wisely. With all my love, Eleanor Blackwood. Serafina sank into a nearby chair, the papers scattered around her like fallen leaves. Everything she'd believed about her identity was a lie. Mordecai wasn't even her stepfather. He was just some stranger who'd wormed his way into their lives after Marcus's death. But more terrifying was the implication. If the Nightingales and Ravencrest families were enemies, what did that make her marriage to Thaddeus? Had he known who she really was? Had this entire arrangement been orchestrated from the beginning? Found something interesting? Serafina spun around to find Cordelia standing in the library entrance, her expression unreadable. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do." Cordelia moved closer, her heels clicking against the hardwood. "Tell me, dear, how does it feel to discover you're not who you thought you were?" "You knew?" "It wasn't a question. I've known since the day Thaddeus announced his engagement." Amazing what a good private investigator can uncover when properly motivated. She picked up one of the scattered documents. Helena Nightingale. Such a tragic story. Died in childbirth, left behind a massive inheritance, and a daughter who disappeared into witness protection. Witness protection? Metaphorically speaking, the Nightingales had many enemies. People who would have used a helpless infant to claim her inheritance or settle old scores. Cordelia's smile was cold. Your adoptive parents were very clever, hiding you in plain sight with a new identity. Serafina's mind raced. Does Thaddeus know? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or should I say, the $100 million question? Cordelia set down the papers carefully. Your trust fund, combined with the Nightingale estate holdings, makes you one of the wealthiest women in America. Quite a coincidence that Thaddeus Ravencrest ended up married to a Nightingale heiress, don't you think? The implication hit like a physical blow. You think he orchestrated this? That he knew who I was and arranged for Mordecai's debts to force the marriage? I think Thaddeus is many things, but he's not a man who believes in coincidences. He built his empire by acquiring assets. And you, my dear, are the ultimate asset. Cordelia moved to the window, gazing out at the grounds. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I'm going to ask him directly. Are you? And what do you think he'll say? That it was all a happy accident? That he fell in love with you despite your fortune, not because of it? She laughed softly. Men like Thaddeus don't do anything without calculating the benefits first. Before Serafina could respond, the sound of a car in the driveway drew their attention. Through the window, they watched as Thaddeus emerged from his sedan, his face grim. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders. He doesn't look happy, Cordelia observed. I wonder what Daddy's lawyers told him today. Serafina gathered the scattered papers, her hands shaking. Everything she'd begun to feel for Thaddeus, the growing attraction, the tentative trust, the hope that their marriage might become something real, now felt like elaborate manipulation. There's something else you should know, Cordelia said as footsteps echoed in the hallway. About the night your adoptive father died. The car accident that orphaned you and left you in Mordecai's care. What about it? It wasn't an accident. The words hit like ice water. What are you talking about? Marcus Blackwood was investigating irregularities in some business dealings. Transactions that connected back to the Ravencrest organization. He was getting close to exposing something that certain people wanted to stay buried. Cordelia's voice dropped to a whisper. The brake lines on his car were cut. Serafina felt the world tilt around her. You're lying. Am I? Or am I the only person willing to tell you the truth about the family you married into? The library door opened, and Thaddeus appeared, his gray eyes immediately finding Serafina. His expression shifted when he saw the papers in her hands. What's going on here? Your wife just discovered some interesting family history, Cordelia said smoothly. We were just discussing the fascinating coincidences that led to your marriage. Thaddeus's gaze moved between them, and Serafina saw the moment he realized what she'd found. His face went carefully blank, but not before she caught a flicker of something that might have been guilt. Serafina, he said carefully, did you know? Her voice came out stronger than she felt. When you agreed to marry me, did you know who I really was? The silence stretched between them like a chasm. She watched his face, searching for any sign of the man who'd kissed her so tenderly the night before, but found only the cold businessman who'd first proposed their arrangement. It's complicated, he said finally. It's a yes or no question, Thaddeus. Yes. The word fell between them like a stone. I knew. Serafina felt something break inside her chest. Everything you said about practical arrangements and business partnerships. It was all lies. Not lies. Different reasons. Maybe, but different reasons? She stood up, the papers clutching in her fists. You let me believe I was some charity case you were helping out of obligation to a debt. But I was never the victim in this situation, was I? I was the prize. Serafina, please let me explain. Explain what? How you've been planning this for years. How you manipulated Mordecai into gambling himself into debt so you could swoop in and claim the Nightingale fortune. Her voice rose with each word. How you made me fall for you while lying about everything. I never lied about my feelings for you. Everything about this marriage is a lie. She threw the papers at his feet, watching them scatter across the expensive carpet. My name, my identity, your motivations, all of it. Thaddeus stepped forward, his hands raised placatingly. If you'll just listen, no. She backed away from him, her heart breaking with each word. I trusted you. I was starting to believe that maybe this could be real, that maybe you actually cared about me. But I was just another acquisition, wasn't I? Another asset to add to your portfolio. That's not true, isn't it? Tell me honestly, Thaddeus. If I weren't Helena Nightingale's daughter, if I didn't come with $100 million inheritance, would you have looked twice at me? The question hung in the air, and his silence was answer enough. I need to get out of here, she whispered. Where will you go? Cordelia asked with false concern. After all, you're not really Serafina Blackwood anymore, are you? And you're certainly not ready to be Serafina Nightingale. Who exactly are you without the identity someone else created for you? The cruelty of the observation hit its mark. Serafina felt lost, unmoored from everything she'd believed about herself and her place in the world. I'll figure it out, she said, moving toward the door. Serafina, don't leave like this, Thaddeus called after her. Let me explain everything. Let me tell you the whole truth. She paused at the threshold, looking back at the man she'd married, the man she'd been falling in love with despite every rational thought. The truth? The truth is that I don't know who I am anymore. And I don't know who you are either. As she fled toward the stairs, she heard Cordelia's satisfied laugh echoing behind her, and she realized that whatever game the other woman had been playing, she'd just won. Serafina spent the night in the guest cottage at the far end of the estate, a small sanctuary she'd discovered during her walks. It had belonged to the original groundskeeper and now served as a romantic retreat for visitors. Tonight, it was her refuge from a marriage that felt like quicksand. She'd turned off her phone after the 15th call from Thaddeus, unable to bear hearing his voice when every word felt like another manipulation. Instead, she sat by the window, watching the sunrise paint the ocean in shades of gold and trying to piece together the fragments of her shattered world. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. She opened the door to find Vivian holding a thermos of coffee and a bag that smelled like fresh pastries. Ezekiel told me where you were, Vivian said gently. Thought you might need some fuel for whatever comes next. Did he send you? Thaddeus? No. He's been locked in his office all night, and from what Ezekiel says, he looks like he's been through a blender. Vivian settled into the small armchair across from her. Want to tell me what happened? The whole story poured out, the hidden documents, the revelation about her true identity, Cordelia's poisonous insinuations about Marcus Blackwood's death, and Thaddeus's devastating admission that he'd known who she was all along. So now I don't know what's real, Serafina finished. Was any of it genuine, or was I just playing my part in some elaborate con? Vivian was quiet for a long moment, sipping her coffee thoughtfully. Can I tell you something about your husband? He's not really my husband. Apparently, our marriage was just a business merger. 3 months ago, before you came into his life, Thaddeus fired his head of security. Serafina looked up, confused by the apparent non sequitur. The man had been with the company for 8 years, Vivian continued. Loyal, efficient, never caused problems. But Thaddeus discovered he'd been taking bribes to look the other way when certain deliveries arrived at the warehouse. What does this have to do with anything? The bribes were $50 each. Pocket change to someone like Thaddeus. But he fired the man anyway, because he said if someone would compromise their integrity for $50, they'd compromise it for $50,000 when the stakes got higher. Serafina frowned. I still don't understand. Thaddeus Ravencrest built his empire on the principle that betrayal is unforgivable. He's obsessive about loyalty and honesty because his father was destroyed by people he trusted. Vivian leaned forward. So ask yourself this. If he's that rigid about integrity, why would he base his marriage on a lie? Because I'm worth $100 million. Or because the truth is more complicated than Cordelia wants you to believe. Before Serafina could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Coffee shop on Montauk Highway. 1 hour. Come alone if you want answers about your father's death. Mordecai. I have to go, Serafina said, grabbing her jacket. Where? To get some real answers. The coffee shop was a small, weathered place that catered to locals rather than Hampton tourists. Serafina found Mordecai hunched over a corner table, looking older and more haggard than she'd ever seen him. His hands shook as he lifted his cup, and there were dark circles under his eyes. You came, he said without looking up. You said you had answers about my father. Marcus wasn't your father, but he loved you like you were his own blood. Mordecai's voice was hoarse. I should have told you the truth years ago, but I was scared. Scared of what? Of them. Of the people who killed him. Serafina felt her world tilt again. Cordelia said his death wasn't an accident. Cordelia Ashworth is a viper, but she's not wrong about everything. He finally met her eyes. Marcus discovered something he shouldn't have. Financial irregularities in the Nightingale estate management. Money being funneled through shell companies. Assets being liquidated without proper authorization. What kind of assets? Properties, investments, art collections. Someone was systematically draining your mother's estate, and Marcus was getting close to exposing who. The Ravencrest family? Mordecai's laugh was bitter. That's what they wanted him to think. But the real embezzler was someone else entirely. Someone who needed a scapegoat. Who? Charles Ashworth. Cordelia's father. The revelation hit like a physical blow. What? Ashworth was the Nightingale family lawyer. He had access to everything, and he'd been skimming for years. When Helena died and you disappeared into protective custody, he thought he was home free. But Marcus was too thorough, too honest. He kept digging until he found the trail. Serafina's mind raced. So Ashworth had him killed to cover it up? The brake lines were cut 2 days before Marcus was scheduled to meet with federal investigators. Mordecai's hands trembled as he reached into his jacket. He gave me this the night before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I should keep it safe until you were old enough to understand. He handed her a small leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. Inside, Marcus's careful handwriting documented years of financial irregularities, complete with account numbers, transaction records, and photocopied documents. This is evidence of embezzlement, Serafina breathed. Evidence that could destroy Charles Ashworth and expose decades of theft from your inheritance. Evidence that Marcus died to protect. Why didn't you take this to the police? Because I was a coward. His voice broke. Because Ashworth threatened you. Said if I ever revealed what Marcus had discovered, you'd have an accident too. So I took you and ran. Figured if I could keep you hidden and ordinary, you'd be safe. But you gambled. You put us in debt. The gambling started as a cover story. Small losses, just enough to explain why we lived so modestly despite Marcus's life insurance. But then it became real, became a sickness I couldn't control. He wiped his eyes with a shaking hand. When the debts got too big, when Ashworth's people started closing in, I thought I was out of options. So you sold me to Thaddeus Ravencrest. I sold you to the one man who had the power to protect you from Charles Ashworth. The one man Ashworth couldn't touch. Serafina stared at him. What are you saying? I'm saying Thaddeus Ravencrest didn't orchestrate this marriage to steal your inheritance. He orchestrated it to save your life. The coffee shop seemed to spin around her. That's impossible. Is it? Think about it, Serafina. Why would a man worth billions need to marry for money? Why would he risk everything on such an elaborate scheme when he could buy and sell companies worth more than your inheritance? Because the Ravencrest and Nightingale families are enemies. According to who? Cordelia Ashworth? Mordecai leaned forward urgently. The feud between those families ended 30 years ago when Thaddeus's father and your grandfather reconciled before they died. The only person who benefits from keeping that hatred alive is Charles Ashworth. Serafina's phone buzzed with a text from Thaddeus. Where are you? Cordelia's gone and something's wrong. Please come home. I have to go, she said, standing abruptly. Serafina, wait. Mordecai grabbed her arm. There's more you need to know. About why Cordelia's really here, about what Ashworth is planning. They're not just after your money anymore. What are they after? Revenge. Against Thaddeus for protecting you, and against you for surviving when you should have died with Marcus. His grip tightened. They know you have the evidence now. They know you can destroy them. Then I'll take it to the FBI. They'll kill you first, just like they killed Marcus, just like they've killed anyone who got too close to the truth. His voice dropped to a whisper. They're already moving. Cordelia didn't come here to win Thaddeus back. She came to finish what her father started 20 years ago. Serafina felt ice in her veins. What do you mean, finish it? I mean, make sure there are no surviving Nightingales to claim what's theirs. As if summoned by his words, a black sedan pulled into the coffee shop parking lot. Through the tinted windows, Serafina could see figures moving inside. Run, Mordecai whispered urgently. Get back to Thaddeus. He's the only one who can protect you now. What about you? I've been running for 20 years. I'm tired. He pressed the journal into her hands. Make them pay for what they did to Marcus. Make them pay for what they took from you. The sedan doors opened, and two men in expensive suits began walking toward the coffee shop entrance. Their movements were too purposeful, too coordinated to be casual. Serafina bolted for the back exit, clutching the journal to her chest. Behind her, she heard Mordecai stand up to meet whatever was coming through the front door. As she ran toward her car, one thought echoed in her mind. She'd been wrong about everything. Thaddeus hadn't been her captor. He'd been her protector. And now, thanks to her dramatic exit and stubborn pride, she might have walked right into the real enemy's trap. She had to get home. She had to warn him. She had to tell him she was sorry for not trusting him. She just hoped she wasn't already too late. Serafina's hands shook as she dialed Thaddeus's number, racing through the Hamptons traffic toward home. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried the house line. No answer. Panic clawed at her throat as she pressed harder on the accelerator. The estate looked normal from the outside, but the front door stood slightly ajar. Serafina parked haphazardly and ran toward the entrance, her heart hammering against her ribs. Thaddeus, she called out, stepping into the foyer. Silence answered her. She found Ezekiel in the kitchen, bound to a chair with duct tape, his eyes wide with fear above the tape covering his mouth. She rushed to free him, her fingers fumbling with the restraints. Where is he? She asked as soon as she'd removed the tape. They took him to the wine cellar. Ezekiel gasped. Miss Ashworth and 3 men. They've been waiting for you to come back. Call the police. I can't. They cut the phone lines and jammed the cell towers somehow. We're completely isolated. Serafina's mind raced. The wine cellar was in the basement, accessible only through the main house. If she called for help from town, it would take too long. By the time police arrived, whatever Cordelia was planning would be finished. There's a gun in Mr. Ravencrest's study, Ezekiel whispered. Top drawer, left side. She found the weapon exactly where he'd said, along with Marcus's journal still clutched in her other hand. The irony wasn't lost on her. The evidence that could destroy the Ashworth family and the means to protect the man she loved. The basement stairs creaked under her feet despite her attempts at stealth. She could hear voices echoing from the wine cellar, Cordelia's sharp tones and Thaddeus's deeper responses. You really thought you could outsmart us? Cordelia was saying as Serafina approached the doorway. Marrying the little Nightingale heiress, playing the noble protector? It wasn't a game, Thaddeus replied, his voice steady despite his circumstances. Unlike your family's 20-year embezzlement scheme, my father was securing his future. Your precious Helena Nightingale was going to destroy everything with her charitable foundations and social justice crusades. Someone had to think practically. Serafina peered around the corner. Thaddeus sat tied to a chair in the center of the wine cellar, surrounded by Cordelia and 2 armed men. A third man stood guard near another entrance. So you killed her, Thaddeus said. Complications during childbirth. These things happen. Cordelia's smile was cold. Though we hadn't counted on the baby surviving or Marcus Blackwood being so insufferably honest. Marcus figured out what your father was doing. Marcus was a problem that required a permanent solution, just like you've become. Serafina felt rage burn through her fear. These people had destroyed her family, stolen her inheritance, and now threatened the man she loved. The gun felt heavy in her hand, but her resolve was absolute. And what about Serafina? Thaddeus asked. She's innocent in all this. Innocent. She's the living proof of our crimes. As long as she exists, as long as she can claim the Nightingale fortune, we're vulnerable. Cordelia checked her watch. She should be arriving soon. We've been monitoring her phone. Such a touching reunion this will be. You're making a mistake, Thaddeus said quietly. I've already transferred copies of all the financial evidence to federal investigators. Killing us won't stop what's coming. Perhaps, but it will give Daddy time to relocate his assets and disappear. Amazing how much money can buy, including new identities and governments that don't ask difficult questions. Serafina knew she had one chance. 3 armed men, but they weren't expecting her to be armed. The element of surprise was her only advantage. She stepped into the doorway, gun raised. Nobody moved. The room erupted in chaos. One of the guards spun toward her, reaching for his weapon. She fired without hesitation, the shot echoing through the stone chamber. The man fell, clutching his shoulder. "Drop your weapons," she shouted, keeping the gun trained on the remaining guards. "How dramatic," Cordelia said, seemingly unperturbed by the violence. The little heiress playing hero. "Do you even know how to use that thing properly? I grew up in Connecticut. Everyone knows how to shoot." Serafina's voice was steadier than she felt. "Now untie my husband. Or what? You'll shoot us all. I don't think you have it in you, dear. Try me." One of the remaining guards made a move toward his gun. Serafina shifted her aim and fired again, the bullet splintering the wine rack inches from his head. The message was clear. "The evidence," she said, pulling Marcus's journal from her jacket. "Everything your father stole, every transaction, every forged document. Marcus documented it all before you killed him." For the first time, Cordelia's composure cracked. "That's impossible. We searched everywhere. You searched Marcus's house. You never thought to look at what he'd given Mordecai." Serafina felt tears sting her eyes as she thought of the man who'd sacrificed everything to protect her. He kept it safe for 20 years, waiting for the right moment. "Give me that journal," Cordelia demanded. "Untie Thaddeus first." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats before Cordelia nodded to one of her men. He moved cautiously toward Thaddeus, cutting the ropes while keeping his gun trained on Serafina. As soon as Thaddeus was free, he moved toward her, but she kept the gun raised. "The journal," Cordelia repeated. "The FBI already has copies," Serafina lied smoothly. "This is just insurance." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Cordelia's eyes widened with panic. "You called the police." "I called everyone. FBI, state police, local authorities. They're probably surrounding the house as we speak." In reality, she'd called no one, but the approaching sirens suggested that someone else had. Ezekiel, perhaps, or neighbors who'd heard the gunshots. Cordelia's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the desperate criminal beneath. "You've ruined everything." "No," Serafina said quietly. "I've finished what my father started. Justice for Helena Nightingale, for Marcus Blackwood, and for every dollar you stole from people who trusted you." The wine cellar filled with the sound of boots on stairs as law enforcement flooded the basement. In the chaos that followed, shouted commands, raised weapons, handcuffs clicking, Serafina finally allowed herself to lower the gun. Thaddeus crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his chest. "I'm sorry I didn't trust you. I'm sorry I believed her lies." "You came back," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved me. We saved each other." As Cordelia was led away in handcuffs, she turned back one last time. "This isn't over. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started." But Serafina wasn't listening anymore. She was thinking about the future, about galleries and museums, about love that had survived lies and manipulation, about building something real from the ashes of deception. The battle was over. Now came the harder part, learning to trust in happy endings. 2 years later, Serafina stood in the main gallery of the Nightingale Foundation, watching visitors discover the art collection her mother had assembled decades ago. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating paintings that had been hidden in storage for too long. "The opening is a complete success," Vivian said, appearing at her side with champagne. "Every major art critic in the city is here, and the Times reviewer looks genuinely moved." Serafina smiled, watching a young girl stare in wonder at a Georgia O'Keeffe painting. Mom would have loved this. She always believed art should be accessible to everyone, not locked away in private collections. Speaking of private collections, Vivian nodded toward the entrance. Your husband just arrived. Thaddeus walked through the gallery doors, scanning the crowd until his eyes found hers. Even after 2 years, her heart still skipped when he looked at her like that, like she was the most beautiful thing in any room filled with masterpieces. He'd changed since that night in the wine cellar. The careful control remained, but now it coexisted with something warmer, more open. Success looked good on him, but love looked better. How's the new curator handling her first major exhibition? He asked, slipping his arms around her waist. Nervous, excited, terrified she's forgotten something important. Impossible. You've planned this down to the last detail. He kissed her temple. Though I notice you're wearing the same expression you had on our wedding day. Which one? She teased. Their first ceremony had been a business transaction. Their second, 6 months later, had been a celebration of love freely chosen. The real one. When you looked at me like you couldn't quite believe we'd made it through everything. Sometimes I still can't. The trial had dominated headlines for months. Charles Ashworth received 25 years for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. Cordelia got 15 years as an accessory. The Ashworth empire crumbled. Their stolen assets returned to their rightful owners. Mordecai survived the attack at the coffee shop, though he'd spent weeks in the hospital. He'd testified against the Ashworths, finally free from the fear that had controlled his life for 2 decades. Now he lived quietly in Vermont, painting landscapes that reminded Serafina of her mother's work. Have you seen the Monet room yet? Thaddeus asked, saving the best for last. They walked hand in hand through the galleries, past visitors discovering treasures that had been lost for years. The Nightingale collection spanned centuries and styles, unified by Helena's vision of art as a bridge between souls. In the Monet room, Thaddeus stopped in front of Water Lilies, the same painting they'd viewed on their first real date. Do you remember what you asked me that day? About seeing light. I remember everything about that day. You were right, you know. About art and love and the things that can't be controlled. He turned to face her fully. I spent years building walls, thinking control meant safety. But you taught me that the most beautiful things happen when you're brave enough to let go. And you taught me that sometimes the people who seem strongest are just the most frightened. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Serafina's breath caught. I know we're already married, he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning Art Deco ring set with sapphires and diamonds. But this time I wanted to choose something that represents who we really are. Not the people circumstance forced us to be, but the people we chose to become. Thaddeus, marry me again, Serafina. Not because of debts or family obligations or anything but this. He gestured to the space between them, to the love that had survived lies and danger and doubt. Marry me because you want to build something beautiful together. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she thought about her mother's paintings, about Marcus's sacrifice, about all the broken pieces that had somehow formed something whole and perfect. Around them, the gallery hummed with life and discovery. Outside, New York City pulsed with 8 million stories of love and loss and redemption. But in this moment, surrounded by art and bathed in golden light, Serafina Ravencrest knew that some stories really do have happy endings. Sometimes love wins. Sometimes justice prevails. Sometimes 2 broken people find exactly what they need in each other. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to start over and do it right.